This is the first piece of Doctor Who media that I've looked at that comes with a heads up at the front end saying, "Hey, we know that this isn't okay. Please forgive us the racism." The Talons of Weng Chiang. I'm not going to worry too much about having butchered that because they made it up. They made up a word to sound Chinese, so I'm not as worried as I might be otherwise. So yeah, there were really only two things I knew about this one going in. That this was the introduction of the characters of Jago and Lightfoot, who got a rather extended spin-off with Big Finish Audio, and unfortunately one of whom we lost recently, Christopher Benjamin, who played Jago, passed away last month. So yeah, that's a little bit of a bummer. I spent a little while trying to figure out where I'd seen him from. It was actually a more recent episode of Doctor Who. I think he's a colonel in Unicorn and the Wasp. Like when they're all around the dinner and have the soup, and the doctor says he put a lot of pepper in it to try and flesh out the Vespa form. The one guy who goes, "Oh, I thought it was jolly spicy." That's him. So I knew that they were in this. I don't know a ton about those characters, but I knew okay, there's like a duo that became a thing. And I knew that there's a lot of yellow face in this. Having said that, there's slightly less yellow face than I was expecting, insofar as there's really only one character. That, of course, is the primary Chinese character, Mr. Wang. And he is, the most important, does the most, recurs. There are a fair number of other Asian characters in it who all appear to be played by actual Asian actors. So, small favors. Like, given that a major character in this is yellow-faced up, complete with prosthetics over his eyelids to give him a permanent little squinty look, whoo, boy. And while there's technically only one character who's flat-out yellow-faced, there is also a caricature puppet, dummy, toy. It gets identified later on as the Peking homunculus. So, think of the most offensive, horribly racist political cartoon style exaggerations of a Chinese face. That's the face of this thing. It's technically not yellow face. It's still kind of offensive. And that's Deep Roy playing that part. I think for a lot of American viewers, the Oompa Loompas in the Tim Burton version of Willy Wonka. He played all of them. So yeah, those were the only things I knew going in. And I ain't gonna defend the yellow face. I ain't gonna defend a number of other racistly related things to that. The fact that characters we are meant to just refer to these people as it's a Chinese. That's not super comfortable. And just as a whole, I ain't gonna defend any of that. That having been said, if you set that aside, I'm not necessarily saying you should, but if we take it just as read, that's bad, this is a pretty good story. I'm saying, it is. It is. It's pretty dang good. I think if it wasn't, honestly, I don't think it would be as well remembered. It would just be shuffled off as embarrassing. But a little bit like how there's some pretty overt racism in Tomb of the Cybermen, which is also a good story. This is not quite that good, but there's going to be some uncomfortable nonsense in some otherwise very good stories. And that's what we've got here with this. So this is the Fourth Doctor and Leela. The more I see of Leela, the more I really like her. And I think I've mentioned this most times I've talked about episodes with Leela in them. I really didn't think there was going to be anything much to her. I remember seeing images of her and like, oh, she's in a leather bikini and she's like a generic warrior woman. She's gonna be like from a primitive world and not understand anything. But like having now actually seen the story that she comes from and seen a fair amount of stuff that she's been in, like, no, there's a lot to her. Like, yes, she is a warrior. She is so quick to jump to violence as a solution. And yeah, she doesn't understand a lot of stuff, but she's also not, she's not stupid. Like, she can put two and two together if you explain the basics to her. So like when stuff is going on, maybe she's using the wrong terms. Maybe she doesn't have a ton of decorum, but she can figure out the basics of what's going on. She's actually pretty clever. She just doesn't have the knowledge base. So there's that. And also, like, part of the result of her being as much of a warrior character is she doesn't get damseled as much as companions around this time tended to. She's not immune from it. There's one bit in here where she kind of gets damseled a bit. Like, there's a cliffhanger that hinges on her needing to be rescued. Though, to be fair, it's not like the villains just captured her. She got herself into a situation, like, with her own agency that just didn't go how she wanted it to, which, you know, grants her more agency than you usually get out of a damsel character. And even that really only happened the one time in this episode. So yeah, I like Leela a lot. And there's some nice little moments. I kind of like how the doctor knows she can take care of herself, but also knows she's kind of out of her depth at the same time. So the way he treats her is kind of interesting. There's also a really great moment between her and Professor Lightfoot. I'll get to Jago and Lightfoot in a minute. Let me get there. Where, like, she's brought in, you know, and there's a dinner laid out, and she just grabs, you know, I don't even know what it was. It was either like a whole pheasant or like a leg of lamb or something, and just starts eating it right off the bone. And, you know, Professor Lightfoot is a little taken aback by that, but rather than try and correct her, he just picks up one himself and starts eating it the same way. Basically kind of capitulating, like, okay, like, I'll just make you feel comfortable if this is what we're doing, which was nice. So I guess let's talk about, like, well, first of all, setting for this is Victorian-ish London. Very, very heavy Sherlock Holmes energy in this, which I like. I am a sucker for Sherlock Holmes, and this has that energy really well. And really, honestly, truly, Jago and Lightfoot are a substitution for Holmes and Watson. Lightfoot being Holmes and Jago being Watson. Now, they're not one-to-one, and the characterization is a little different than you traditionally get from them, but it is kind of the deal, like right down to the fact that Lightfoot has a housekeeper named Mrs. Hudson. Like, they're not subtle, and they've got the doctor walking around in a deerstalker cap. So, like, yeah, it's not too subtle about it, which I'm totally okay with, because honestly, this is a 6-part story. Now, a good chunk of what went on in the Fourth Doctor's era were 4-part stories, and I do think 4-part stories of 22, 24-minute lengths per episode is kind of the sweet spot for Doctor Who. That's not to say that there aren't some longer ones that are good or there aren't some shorter ones that are good. Some of my favorite 7th Doctor stories are only 3 parts. But when you start going above 4 parts, more often than not, you end up getting certain episodes that feel like filler, or you just kind of feel like the story being stretched because it's like, this shouldn't be taking as long as it does. And you don't really have that here. And I think the main reason you don't is because you have a really good and interesting and dynamic supporting cast. Because the fact that the show can, follow the Doctor and Leela for a bit, but then go to, deal with Lightfoot or show us Jago, and like when these two finally meet up in like episode 4 and start actually working together, go between the Doctor and Leela and go back to them. You're not going like, oh God, this is just filling time. It's like, oh no, I like them. I want to see what they're up to. So it shows the strength of well-written supporting cast and casting them well. As I said, Lightfoot, he's kind of he's a professor of pathology, I believe. So he's kind of, he helps out the police a little bit. Jago gets roped in by much more sheer coincidence because he is a theater manager where our Yellowface character, he was hard to look at, but where he is a magician, effectively. You know, the sort of class, and this is at least true for the kinds of magic acts that were going on at the time. But you know, sort of the ancient Chinese secrets of the Orient and mysticism. Like he's pulling that shtick, which again is the thing that was not uncommon at the time. So I'm not gonna fault the character a ton. I am gonna fault the white guy in the makeup doing an English accent, but again, we're taking that as read. But like, to be fair, he performs the character well. That justifies nothing. It's not okay. It's not okay. But he performs the character well, and it actually turns out that he is sort of serving someone else, and who we eventually get a name for. I think it was Magnus Greel. So Greel is very much Phantom of the Opera energy coming off of him. Not just because he kind of lives in the sewers and has a mask, but like also that kind of volatility. And actually, what I like about him, what we kind of get a real strong sense of as the show goes on, is he's not some super genius. He is a violent moron from the far future who ended up in the past with some sort of nascent and like primitive time travel technology that's actually a really bad idea because it uses power sources that are incredibly unstable. And the doctor basically describing this guy as like, oh no, he's an absolute idiot. He doesn't know what he's doing. And he's going to get everybody killed because of that. So I kind of like that, that he's dangerous not because he's clever and manipulative. He's dangerous because he just has hold of really dangerous stuff and he doesn't know what he's doing, but he's arrogant and desperate enough to think that he does. So that works well. Like I don't want that kind of villain too often, but I tend to like that kind of villain when it shows up because it just feels more real. Than the mastermind pulling all the strings, and maybe it also just feels more real because of the current environment where I'm in a country being governed by dangerous idiots. But anyway, moving on. I'm sure I'm not trying to have current politics enter into too much stuff, but but also just the dynamic between him and Wang, their whole thing. No, it was Chang. All right, I just checked it. It's Mr. Chang. I don't know why I thought it was. You know what? This actually threw me off the whole time because it's the Talons of Weng Chiang, and he's Mr. Chang, not Chiang, but Chang, and that threw me off. And then for some reason, my brain fixated on the first part because I was already mixing them up. That's why that happened. If you correct me in the comments about that name, you will just be proving that you didn't finish the video. Ha ha! I'm not a mastermind. Just a dangerous moron. I'm not dangerous. I'm adorable. Anyways, so the dynamic between Chang and Greel is also kind of interesting because Chang is like trying to do his best, but Greel is just just such an emotional disaster that like he just doesn't appreciate anything that's being done, and he's just horrible. So it's got some interesting dynamics. So even between the villains, it's enough that when we come back to them, I'm not like, yeah. So here's this thing that you're stretching out time. It's probably about the best paced 6-parter I can think of off the top of my head that I've seen, at least in a while. And then we get giant rats which are adorable. An effect achieved in one of two ways. Initially by just putting a rat in a very small miniaturized set, and then there's sort of the puppet version of this big puppet, fluffy stuff, these big cheeks. It looks more like a chipmunk. It's really funny and it's really cute. I like that. But yeah, overall, if, and it's a huge if, like it's a massive if you can get past the racism, because yep, it's there and it's prevalent and it's persistent and it's in the whole thing. If you can get past that, not by excusing it, by accepting it that like that wasn't okay and they shouldn't have done that, and you're willing to watch it anyway, it's pretty good. It always feels awkward to like see one of these like classic problematic pieces of media being like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to defend the issues, but it is kind of good though. Like on its own merits. And this is. Like, I like the Doctor and Leela as a dynamic. Jago's a fun character. Lightfoot's a fun character. They're even better when you pair them together. The Griot, sort of the true primary villain, is done in a way that I found interesting just because of his kind of volatile nature, and it makes him at times unpredictable, but at other times like you can kind of count on what he's going to do, and as he sort of flips back and forth in his anger, it's just a well-handled dynamic for a villain, and it's well-paced for 6 parts. And also, you know, heavy Sherlock Holmes vibes, and I'm a sucker for Sherlock Holmes. Both like as a general energy and also that kind of Victorian setting. I like it. I just do. So, yeah. It's pretty good, minus the racism. So what did you think of this one? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living, even if you can't help me out that way. Like, share, subscribe, maybe. I'll be back next month with another classic Doctor Who review. I did it earlier this month than I have been lately. They've been kind of towards the very end of the month lately. I wanted to get this one done earlier. But, you know, regardless, don't worry too much about it. Just come on back next time you need a break. And now to thank my highest supporting Patreon supporters: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Goddess Elida, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Movie Turtle, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Andre, Becky Sparks, Claire Wright, Fernabilax the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Adam RDL Taylor, Palbo Rabajagal, Mary Mello, Mira G, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. If you want to see me try and read your name while dealing with these little pains in my butt, check out the rewards on my Patreon and see if there's any that you like.